never planned for any of this. My life was organized, controlled, and mine alone. Then one fateful night changed everything between me and Thaddius Blackwood, my alpha CEO boss, whose mere presence made the omega in me tremble. When my suppressants failed during our late-night meeting, what should have been a simple discussion about author acquisitions erupted into a night of passion that haunted my dreams for weeks afterward. I thought I could just walk away. I was wrong. The pregnancy test stared back at me with its cruel little plus sign. Male omegas rarely conceive. Yet here I was carrying the child of the most powerful alpha in publishing. I tried hiding it, avoiding him, pretending that night never happened. But Thaddius Blackwood gets what he wants. Always. When he discovered my secret, his eyes darkened with a possessiveness that terrified and thrilled me. "You're mine now," he growled, his alpha voice making my knees weak. "Both of you." Now I live in his luxury penthouse, fighting daily battles between my fierce independence and my treacherous omega instincts that crave his protection. My career hangs by a thread as colleagues whisper about favoritism and my ex lurks in the shadows threatening to expose my past. I refuse to be claimed to be owned like property. But each time Thaddius touches me, each time his scent wraps around me like a shield, I wonder if surrender might be its own kind of strength. This is my story of control, desire, and finding love in the most unexpected place. I slammed my subway card against the reader, cursing under my breath as it failed to register on the first try. 3 attempts later, I finally pushed through the turnstile, only to see my train pulling away. Perfect start to a Monday morning. My name is Zane Cooper, 28 years old omega and currently 15 minutes late for the most important meeting of my career at Pinnacle Publishing. As a literary agent fighting for recognition in an alpha-dominated industry, I couldn't afford slip-ups like this. I checked my watch and grimaced. The quarterly strategy meeting started at 900 a.m. sharp, and our CEO, Thaddius Blackwood, was notorious for locking the conference room doors exactly on time. Being late wasn't just embarrassing. It could be career suicide. The next train arrived in 7 minutes, which would put me at the office by 9:20. I pulled out my phone to text my assistant, asking her to make up some excuse about a client emergency. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than nothing. As I waited, I discreetly touched the small patch behind my ear, my suppressant delivery system working efficiently to mask my omega scent and control my biology. In publishing, as in most corporate environments, being an omega was a liability. We were seen as too emotional, too unpredictable, and ultimately too distracting for the alphas in leadership positions. I'd worked too hard to let biology dictate my future. The train finally arrived, and I squeezed into the packed car, trying not to wrinkle my carefully pressed navy suit. 20 stressful minutes later, I rushed through the gleaming lobby of Pinnacle Publishing's headquarters, flashing my badge at security and heading straight for the executive floor. Outside the conference room, my assistant, Myra, was waiting with a coffee and a sympathetic smile. "You're lucky he's running late, too. Some emergency call with Tokyo." I accepted the coffee gratefully. "You're a lifesaver." The team from marketing is already inside. And fair warning, the budget reports came back worse than expected. Blackwood's on the warpath. I groaned internally. Thaddius Blackwood had taken over as CEO of Pinnacle 18 months ago. And in that time, he'd earned a reputation for brutal efficiency. The son of publishing royalty, he transformed his family's respectable mid-sized company into a ruthless market leader through strategic acquisitions and aggressive cost-cutting. He was also an alpha. Not just any alpha, but the kind that made even other alphas lower their eyes when he entered a room. The kind whose scent lingered hours after he'd left. The kind I'd spent my entire career avoiding. I straightened my tie, checked my reflection in my phone screen, and pushed through the double doors just as Thaddius Blackwood himself emerged from the private elevator at the end of the hall. Our eyes met briefly, and I felt that familiar, unwelcome tightening in my chest that always came with alpha proximity. His dark gaze swept over me for a second before he nodded curtly and gestured for me to enter ahead of him. "Mr. Cooper," he said, his voice deep and measured. "Cutting it close today." "I see." I kept my expression neutral. "Tfic issues." "It won't happen again, sir." He smiled slightly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "See that it doesn't." Inside the conference room, the marketing and editorial teams had already assembled. I took my seat quickly, pulled out my tablet, and tried to look composed while my heart raced from the brief interaction. Thaddius Blackwood was intimidatingly handsome in the way that powerful men often are, tall with broad shoulders, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. His dark hair was styled perfectly with just a touch of silver at the temples that somehow made him look more authoritative rather than older. He couldn't be much past 38, but he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. The meeting began with departmental updates. As the head of the literary fiction division, I was scheduled to present our acquisition strategy for the upcoming year. I'd been working on landing Jerome Walsh, an award-winning author whose contract with a rival publisher was ending. Securing him would be a major coup for Pinnacle and hopefully earn me the promotion I'd been chasing. "Cooper, you're up," Blackwood said after the marketing presentation concluded. I stood, clicked to my first slide, and launched into my carefully prepared pitch. Literary fiction continues to be a growth opportunity for Pinnacle. While commercial titles drive volume, our literary acquisitions establish our brand prestige and open doors to film and television partnerships. I outlined our strategy for the coming year, emphasizing the potential signing of Jerome Walsh. His last 3 novels have been critically acclaimed bestsellers, and our research suggests his next manuscript examines themes that align perfectly with our current list. I was halfway through explaining the competitive landscape when Blackwood interrupted. "What makes you think Walsh would leave Meridian Press? They've published his entire career." I'd anticipated this question. His editor at Meridian recently moved to Harper, and according to my industry sources, he was dissatisfied with the marketing push for his last novel. I've already had preliminary conversations with his agent, who's indicated he's open to exploring options. Blackwood leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "And you believe you can close this deal?" Something in his tone made my spine stiffen. There was a challenge there, possibly even doubt. "Yes, I do," I replied firmly. "I've prepared a comprehensive pitch that addresses his specific concerns, and I've secured a meeting with him next week." "Impressive," he said, though his tone suggested anything but. "And what's your contingency if Walsh decides to stay loyal to Meridian?" I felt the eyes of everyone in the room on me. This was a test and we both knew it. I've identified 3 other authors with similar market potential who are also approaching contract renewal, I said, clicking to my backup slide. While none have Walsh's profile yet, our data suggests they're on similar trajectories. I continued with my presentation, aware of Blackwood's intense scrutiny. When I finished, he asked several pointed questions about revenue projections and marketing strategies. I answered each one confidently, having prepared extensively. Finally, he nodded. "Proceed with the Walsh pursuit. I want weekly updates directly to me." The meeting continued with other departments reporting, but I found it hard to concentrate. Direct reporting to the CEO was unusual for someone at my level. It could be a vote of confidence, or it could mean he didn't trust me to handle it through normal channels. After the meeting adjourned, I gathered my materials quickly, hoping to escape before any one-on-one interaction with Blackwood. But as I reached the door, his voice stopped me. "Cooper, a word." I turned back, maintaining a professional smile as the room emptied. "Yes, sir." Blackwood waited until we were alone before speaking. "Your presentation was thorough, but I'm concerned about your approach with Walsh." I felt a flicker of irritation. "May I ask why authors like Walsh respond to personal connections, not just data and strategy? Have you established any rapport with him yet?" I've met him twice at industry events, I said, and we've had meaningful conversations about his work. I believe we connected well. Blackwood studied me, his expression unreadable. Good. But remember, authors of his caliber need to feel understood on a deeper level. They need to trust that their publisher genuinely values their artistic vision. I'm aware of that, sir. He smiled slightly, and this time it seemed more genuine. I don't doubt your capabilities, Cooper. Your reputation preceded you when I took over Pinnacle. I'm simply ensuring we're aligned on approach. The compliment caught me off guard. Thank you, sir. Schedule some time with my assistant this week. I want to discuss your strategy in more detail before your meeting with Walsh. With that, he gathered his papers and left, leaving behind that distinct alpha scent. Sandalwood, amber, and something uniquely his. I found myself inhaling deeply before catching myself. This was exactly what I'd spent years avoiding, getting too close to an alpha in a position of power over me. Office romances were complicated enough without adding alpha-omega dynamics to the mix. I'd seen too many talented omegas sidelined after becoming involved with alphas at work. I returned to my office, trying to focus on preparing for my meeting with Jerome Walsh. But my mind kept drifting back to Blackwood's intense scrutiny. I couldn't afford to be distracted by primitive biology when my career was at stake. The week passed in a blur of meetings and preparation. By Friday afternoon, I was exhausted but satisfied with my pitch for Walsh. I just sent the final version to my team when my phone rang. Mr. Cooper came the crisp voice of Blackwood's assistant. Mr. Blackwood would like to review your Walsh presentation this evening at 7:00 p.m. in his office. I checked my calendar, though I already knew I had dinner plans with friends. Tonight. Is there any possibility of doing it Monday morning instead? The meeting with Walsh isn't until Tuesday. Mr. Blackwood specifically requested tonight. He's traveling to London on Monday. I suppressed a sigh. Of course. I'll be there. After texting my apologies to my friends, I spent the next 2 hours refining my presentation. By 6:50 p.m. The office had emptied out, and I took the executive elevator to the top floor, where Blackwood's office occupied the entire west wing. His assistant had already left for the day, so I knocked directly on his office door. Come in, called that now familiar deep voice. Thaddius Blackwood's office was exactly what you'd expect from a publishing mogul. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound classics and modern bestsellers. A massive desk of polished mahogany and wall-to-wall windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The space exuded power and taste. Blackwood himself had shed his suit jacket and loosened his tie. He was standing by the window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, silhouetted against the city lights. Cooper, he said, turning. Thank you for accommodating the late meeting. Drink. No. Thank you, I replied, suddenly aware of how alone we were. The entire floor was likely deserted at this hour. He gestured to the sitting area. 2 leather armchairs facing a small table. Let's sit there more comfortable for a longer discussion. I took a seat, opening my tablet to my presentation. I've made some refinements since the meeting. I believe this approach addresses your concerns about connecting with Walsh on a personal level. Blackwood sat across from me, his presence somehow filling the space between us. Walk me through it. For the next hour, we discussed my strategy in detail. To my surprise, Blackwood offered thoughtful insights about Walsh's work, revealing himself to be genuinely well-read and perceptive about literary trends. You've clearly done your homework, he said eventually, leaning back in his chair. I'm impressed. Thank you, I said, feeling an unexpected warmth at his approval. Literary fiction has always been my passion. That's evident. He studied me for a moment. You know, when I took over Pinnacle, there were several department heads I considered replacing. You weren't one of them. I blinked in surprise. I appreciate that vote of confidence. It wasn't charity. Your division has consistently identified emerging talent before our competitors. That's valuable. The conversation shifted to broader industry trends, and I found myself engaged in one of the most stimulating professional discussions I'd had in months. Blackwood was surprisingly easy to talk to when not surrounded by other executives. Thoughtful, incisive, and genuinely interested in my opinions. 2 hours passed before I realized it. When I checked my watch, I was shocked to see it was past 900 p.m. Should let you get to your evening? I said, gathering my materials. Blackwood nodded, but made no move to end our meeting. One more thing. Have you considered the financial terms we might need to offer Walsh? I've prepared some projections, I said, pulling up another file. Based on his sales history and comparable authors. I believe. I stopped mid-sentence. A sudden wave of dizziness washing over me. The room seemed too warm, and Blackwood's alpha sense suddenly intensified in my awareness. Cooper, are you all right? Blackwood was looking at me with concern. Fine. I managed, though my voice sounded strained, even to my own ears. Just a long day. But I knew this feeling. It was impossible. My suppressants were top of the line, and I'd been on them consistently for years, but the symptoms were unmistakable. The heightened sensitivity to alpha pheromones. The flush creeping up my neck. The subtle loosening of my muscles. My suppressants were failing, and I was going into heat here now. With the most powerful alpha I knew. Sitting 3 feet away. I needed to leave immediately. Actually, I said, standing too quickly. I'm not feeling well. I should go home. We can continue this on Monday. Blackwood rose as well, his expression shifting from concern to something else. Something that made my pulse quicken. Of course, he said, his voice lower than before. I'll call you a car. That's not necessary, I said, backing toward the door. I can manage, but another wave of dizziness hit me stronger this time. And I stumbled slightly. Blackwood moved with surprising speed, catching my arm to steady me. The moment his hand touched my skin, an electric current seemed to race through my body. I jerked away instinctively, but the damage was done. In that brief contact, I knew he had sensed the change in me. His pupils dilated and his nostrils flared slightly, subtle signs that would be imperceptible to anyone who hadn't spent their life learning to read alpha reactions. Your suppressants, he said, keeping his distance now. They're not working. I swallowed hard. Apparently not. I need to go now. He nodded, but made no move toward the door. You can't take the subway like this, Cooper. It's not safe. He was right. And we both knew it. An omega in preheat on public transportation was vulnerable in ways I didn't want to contemplate. I'll call a car service, I said, pulling out my phone with shaking hands. Black would watch me for a moment, then walk to his desk, putting more distance between us. It was a considerate gesture when I hadn't expected. Use my private elevator, he said, pressing a button on his desk. It goes directly to the parking garage. My driver can take you home. I don't need this. Isn't a debate, Cooper. His voice had taken on that unmistakable alpha timbre that bypassed rational thought and spoke directly to omega instincts. My driver is discreet and the car is scent sealed. I should have argued. Should have maintained my independence. But the heat was building rapidly now, and the thought of waiting for a random car service suddenly seemed like a terrible idea. Fine. I conceded. Thank you. He wrote something on a card and handed it to me. Careful not to let our fingers touch. My private number. Text me when you get home safely. I took the card, surprised by the gesture. I will. The elevator arrived with a soft ping, and I stepped inside, clutching my tablet to my chest like a shield. Cooper, Blackwood said just before the doors closed. Take care of yourself. The ride down to the garage was mercifully short. Blackwood's driver was waiting as promised, opening the door to a sleek black sedan without comment. As we pulled away from Pinnacle's headquarters, I leaned my head against the cool window and tried to steady my breathing. The car's scent-blocking technology was working. I couldn't smell the driver at all, but my body was still racing toward a full heat. I hadn't experienced an uncontrolled heat in 5 years. Not since my suppressants had been properly calibrated. The timing couldn't have been worse. I'd have to call my doctor for emergency suppressants and reschedule the Walsh meeting. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Did you get home?" It was from Blackwood. I realized with embarrassment that we were still in traffic. "Not yet, about 10 minutes away. Let me know when you're safely inside." The concern seemed genuine, which was unexpected. Most alphas in his position would have either taken advantage of the situation or dismissed me entirely. When we finally arrived at my apartment building, I thanked the driver and hurried inside, my skin now hypersensitive to every brush of fabric. I managed to make it to my apartment before the worst symptoms hit. I texted Blackwood a quick "home safely" before calling my doctor's emergency line. The answering service informed me that the earliest they could get emergency suppressants to me would be tomorrow morning. One night. I could handle one night of discomfort. But as I paced my apartment, the heat building to unbearable levels, my phone lit up with another text from Blackwood. "I'm outside your building. May I come up? I have emergency suppressants." I stared at the message in disbelief. How had he gotten my address? Why would he have suppressants? And why was he here? Every rational part of me knew I should refuse. But the omega in me, burning with need and desperate for relief, had already typed apartment 5B before I could stop myself. 3 minutes later, there was a soft knock at my door. I stood frozen at my apartment door, suddenly aware of how disheveled I must look. My carefully styled hair was now damp with sweat. My cheeks flushed, and my crisp white shirt clung uncomfortably to my skin. Taking a deep breath that did nothing to steady my nerves, I opened the door. Thaddius Blackwood stood in my hallway, looking as composed as ever, despite the late hour. The only sign of tension was a slight tightness around his eyes as his gaze swept over me. "You brought suppressants?" I asked. My voice embarrassingly hoarse. He nodded, holding up a small medical kit. "May I come in?" Every instinct screamed that letting an alpha into my apartment while I was in preheat was dangerously stupid. But the alternative, spending the night in agony, was worse. I stepped aside. "Thank you for bringing these." Blackwood entered his alpha scent, instantly filling my small living room despite his obvious efforts to minimize his presence. He moved directly to my kitchen counter, maintaining distance between us. "Emergency Omega Care Kit," he explained, opening the case. "My sister is an Omega. I keep one at the office for her visits." That explained how he had suppressants on hand. Still, his foresight in bringing them here was unexpected. "The injection works fastest," he said, removing a small syringe. "Can you administer it yourself, or do you need assistance?" The thought of him touching me sent a dangerous thrill through my already oversensitized body. "I can manage," I said, taking the syringe with trembling fingers. He nodded and turned his back, giving me privacy. I quickly rolled up my sleeve and injected the suppressant into my upper arm, wincing at the sting. "There's also a cooling patch for your neck," Blackwood said, still facing away. "It helps reduce the symptoms while the medication takes effect." I applied the patch immediately, feeling a blessed coolness spread across my overheated skin. "Thank you," I said again, meaning it. This was incredibly thoughtful. Blackwood turned back to face me, his expression unreadable. "It should take effect within 30 minutes. I can wait to ensure it works properly. Or I can leave now if you prefer." The proper response would be to thank him and send him on his way. But something in his careful consideration made me hesitate. "You can stay until we know it works," I found myself saying. Can I offer you water? Coffee? Water would be fine. I moved to the kitchen, grateful for the mundane task to focus on. My apartment suddenly felt too small, too intimate with Thaddius Blackwood standing in it. He looked ridiculously out of place among my mismatched furniture and overflowing bookshelves like a jaguar in a college dorm room. You have an impressive collection, he noted, scanning my bookshelves while I poured water. Occupational hazard, I replied, handing him the glass. I can't pass a bookstore without buying something. He accepted the water, careful not to let our fingers touch. I noticed you have a first edition, Auster. Rare find. I glanced at my prized possession. A signed first edition of the New York trilogy I'd found at a second-hand shop in Brooklyn years ago. You know his work. He's one of my favorites. The admission seemed genuine. Another glimpse of the man behind the corporate mask. We lapsed into silence, both acutely aware of my condition and the dangerous potential of our situation. After 15 minutes, however, I felt the suppressant beginning to work. The feverish heat receded and my awareness of Blackwood's scent diminished to a manageable level. It's working, I said with relief. Thank you again. I don't know what I would have done without this. Blackwood nodded. Call your doctor tomorrow. Emergency suppressants are temporary measures. I already left a message with their service. He finished his water and set the glass down. Then I should go and let you rest. At the door, he paused. Take Monday off if you need to. The Walsh meeting isn't until Tuesday. I'll be fine by Monday, I assured him, though I appreciated the consideration. He studied me for a moment longer than necessary. What happened tonight stays between us. Cooper, your position and reputation at Pinnacle are unchanged. I hadn't even considered the professional implications until that moment. How easily he could have used this vulnerability against me. I appreciate that. With a final nod, he left. I closed the door behind him and leaned against it, exhaling a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding what had just happened. My alpha CEO had seen me at my most vulnerable, had helped instead of exploited, and had then left without taking advantage. It contradicted everything I thought I knew about alphas in positions of power. I touched the cooling patch on my neck and tried not to think about how different the evening could have ended. The weekend passed in a blur of doctor appointments and rest. By Monday morning, I was back on properly calibrated suppressants and feeling like myself again. I decided to go into the office partly to prove I could maintain professionalism after Friday's incident and partly because I had too much work to do before the Walsh meeting. The day was productive with no sign of Blackwood, who was presumably still in London. I managed to finalize my pitch for Walsh and coordinate with the contracts team on potential terms. By Tuesday morning, I was ready. The meeting with Jerome Walsh was scheduled for lunch at his favorite restaurant in the West Village. I dressed carefully in my best suit, reviewed my notes one last time, and headed out feeling confident. The meeting went better than I could have hoped. Walsh was engaged, asked insightful questions about Pinnacle's vision for his work, and seemed particularly interested in our digital strategy. By the time dessert arrived, he was discussing potential publication timelines. As if the deal was already done. I'll need to formally discuss this with my agent. Of course, he said as we waited for the check. But I'm impressed with your approach, Zane. You clearly understand what my work needs. That means a lot coming from you. I replied sincerely. Your last novel was transformative for the genre. Walsh smiled, pleased by the specific compliment. I'll have my agent call you by the end of the week. I left the restaurant walking on air. Landing Walsh would be a major achievement. Exactly the kind of success I needed to secure my promotion to senior agent. I was so buoyed by the meeting's success that I didn't immediately check my phone. When I finally did, I found 3 missed calls from my assistant and a text that simply read, Blackwood wants to see you ASAP when you're back. My stomach tightened. Had something gone wrong during his London trip? Was he reconsidering the Walsh pursuit? I hurried back to the office, stopping briefly at my desk to drop off my things before heading to the executive floor. Blackwood's assistant waved me straight in. Thaddius Blackwood was standing by the window again, his back to the door. He turned when I entered, his expression giving nothing away. "Cooper, how was the meeting with Walsh?" "Extremely positive," I reported. "He engaged with every aspect of our proposal and indicated he's strongly leaning our way. His agent will be in touch by the end of the week." Instead of the approval I expected, Blackwood's expression darkened. "Sit down, Cooper." I took a seat, confused by his reaction. "Is something wrong?" He remained standing, looking down at me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "When were you planning to tell me?" "Tell you what?" I asked, genuinely bewildered. He placed a folder on the desk between us. "The results of your medical exam from Saturday?" My blood ran cold. "How do you have access to my private medical information?" "Pinnacle's health insurance flags certain employee health changes that might impact work performance. As CEO, I'm notified of significant developments. That's a serious privacy violation," I said, anger rising to replace the initial shock. "Perhaps," he acknowledged. "But in this case, it's relevant to company operations." "In what possible way is my health relevant to company operations?" Blackwood sat down, his gaze never leaving mine. "Because you're pregnant, Cooper. And given the timing and circumstances, I believe I'm the father." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "That's not possible. According to your medical records, you're approximately 8 weeks pregnant. 8 weeks ago was our night together." "8 weeks?" I echoed, my mind racing. That couldn't be right. I'd only been with Blackwood 3 days ago. And then I remembered the office party 2 months ago. The champagne I rarely drank. The elevator ride where Blackwood and I had been alone. The tension between us finally breaking into a passionate encounter that we both silently agreed to forget. "The elevator," I whispered, memories flooding back. Blackwood nodded grimly. "I assumed you were on birth control in addition to suppressants." "I am where I thought I was. This shouldn't be possible. And yet here we are." Blackwood's tone was measured, but I could sense the tension underneath. "Male omega pregnancies are rare but not unheard of." I stared at him in disbelief. This couldn't be happening. My carefully planned life, my career trajectory, everything I'd worked for was suddenly at risk. "I need time to process this," I said, standing up. "And I need to speak with my doctor about these results that were apparently shared without my consent." Blackwood rose as well. "Of course. Take whatever time you need. But we will need to discuss this further." I left his office in a daze, barely remembering the walk back to my own desk. Pregnant with Thaddius Blackwood's child. It was a complication beyond anything I could have imagined. The next 2 days passed in a blur of denial and doctor appointments. The pregnancy was confirmed. A rare but viable male omega pregnancy. Approximately 8 weeks along. The birth control had failed, possibly interacting with my suppressants in an unexpected way. I considered all my options carefully, weighing each path forward. By Friday morning, I had made my decision. I would keep the child, raise it independently, and find a way to balance parenthood with my career ambitions. I would inform Blackwood of the pregnancy, but make it clear that I expected nothing from him beyond basic acknowledgement. I scheduled a meeting with him for Friday afternoon, prepared to lay out my plans in a professional, detached manner. But when I arrived at his office, I found him already engaged in a heated discussion with the head of legal. "I don't care about the contract penalties," Blackwood was saying as I entered. "Find a way to make it happen." They both looked up at my arrival. The legal director nodded to me and quickly excused himself. "Cooper," Blackwood said, his tone softening slightly. "Please sit down. I've come to discuss the situation." I began, determined to control the conversation. "Yes. We need to establish a plan moving forward. He agreed. I've been considering the best approach for all parties involved. Something in his phrasing put me on alert. The best approach is for me to continue my work while making appropriate accommodations for my pregnancy. I don't expect anything from you personally. Blackwood's expression hardened. That's not acceptable. Excuse me. You're carrying my child. Cooper. That creates certain responsibilities that I take very seriously. I bristled at his tone. My body. My choice. I've made my decision to keep this child. But that doesn't obligate you to anything beyond what you choose to provide. You misunderstand me, Blackwood said, leaning forward. I'm not suggesting you terminate. I'm saying your plan to continue as if nothing has changed is unrealistic and potentially dangerous. Dangerous. Male omega pregnancies are high risk. You'll need specialized medical care, reduced stress, and appropriate accommodations. Working 60-hour weeks in a high-pressure environment isn't compatible with your condition. His presumption infuriated me. I'm perfectly capable of managing my own health. Thank you. This isn't just about you anymore, he said, his voice taking on that alpha rumble that made my omega instinct stand at attention. It's about our child. Our child? The phrase hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. What exactly are you suggesting? I asked cautiously. Move in with me, he said simply. I have a penthouse with plenty of space. You'll have your own room, complete privacy, and access to the best medical care. In return, you'll reduce your workload and allow me to ensure your well-being during the pregnancy. I stared at him momentarily, speechless. You want me to live with you? That's absurd. It's practical, he countered, and it allows me to fulfill my obligations to my child. And what happens after the birth? Do I just move out and we establish some kind of custody arrangement? Blackwood's jaw tightened. We'll address that when the time comes. I stood up, needing physical distance from this conversation. This is exactly why I wanted to handle this independently. I won't be controlled or owned. Blackwood. This isn't about control, he insisted, though his commanding presence suggested otherwise. It's about responsibility. I decline your offer, I said firmly. I'll manage this pregnancy my way and we can discuss appropriate involvement for you after the birth. I turned to leave, but his next words stopped me cold. I've already arranged for you to be appointed as Special Projects Director reporting directly to me. The position comes with a substantial raise, flexible hours, and the understanding that your health is the priority. I turned back slowly. You're creating a position for me without my knowledge or consent. I'm offering you an opportunity, he corrected. One that benefits both of us. You get career advancement and appropriate accommodations. I get the peace of mind knowing you and the child are being properly cared for. It was manipulative, presumptuous, and exactly the kind of alpha behavior I despised. It was also frustratingly a practical solution to several problems I was facing. And if I refuse this opportunity, Blackwood's expression remained impassive. Then you continue in your current role with all its stress and demands while I worry constantly about the well-being of my child. Neither of us wins in that scenario. I needed time to think to consider all the angles without his overwhelming presence influencing me. I need 48 hours to consider your proposal. 24. He countered. This isn't a negotiation, Cooper. It's a recognition of reality. Fine. 24 hours. I walked to the door then paused. For the record, this approach, making decisions about my life without consulting me, doesn't inspire confidence in your ability to co-parent respectfully. A flash of something like regret crossed his features. Noted. I look forward to your decision tomorrow. I spent that night packing my apartment, weighing my options. The practical benefits of Blackwood's offer were undeniable. The promotion would secure my financial future and provide the flexibility I would need with a child. Living in his penthouse would eliminate my housing costs and give me access to better amenities and care. But the cost to my independence seemed too high. Moving into Thaddius Blackwood's home would put me directly under his influence, subject to his rules and expectations. I'd spent my entire adult life avoiding exactly this kind of power imbalance. By morning, I'd made my decision. I would accept the promotion, but decline the living arrangement. It was a compromise that protected my core values while acknowledging the realities of my situation. I called Blackwood's private number, prepared to negotiate my counter-offer. To my surprise, he suggested meeting at a neutral location, a private dining room at an upscale restaurant near the office. When I arrived, Blackwood was already seated, studying a document with intense concentration. He stood when I entered, his expression carefully neutral. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I thought a change of venue might facilitate a more productive conversation. I sat down, nodding that he'd ordered sparkling water for both of us. "I've considered your proposal, and I'll accept the promotion, but I prefer to maintain my own residence." Blackwood didn't seem surprised. I anticipated that response. "May I ask your reasoning?" "Independence is fundamental to who I am," I explained. "Living under your roof, regardless of the terms, would compromise that." He considered this for a moment. "What if we modified the arrangement? I own several properties in the city. You could occupy one independently with the same financial and medical benefits I proposed." "That feels uncomfortably like being kept," I said bluntly. A hint of frustration crossed his features. "That's not my intention." "What is your intention, Blackwood?" "Because from where I'm sitting, this feels like an alpha trying to claim and control an omega who happens to be carrying his child. Is it so difficult to believe I'm genuinely concerned for your well-being and that of our child?" "Yes," I said honestly, "because you barely know me as a person. Our interactions have been primarily professional with the exception of one night neither of us had planned to acknowledge again." Blackwood was silent for a long moment. "You're right," he finally said. "I don't know you well, but I do know that you're intelligent, capable, and fiercely independent. I respect those qualities." The admission surprised me. "Then respect my decision to handle this pregnancy on my terms." "I'm trying," he said. "But you need to understand my position as well. This is my child, too. I have a responsibility that I take seriously." For the first time, I considered how this situation might look from his perspective. An unexpected pregnancy with an employee he respected professionally but barely knew personally. A child he felt responsible for but had limited means to protect. "What if we compromise?" I suggested. "I accept the promotion and remain in my apartment for now. You can arrange for whatever additional medical care you deem necessary. We meet weekly to discuss any developments and decisions related to the pregnancy and after the birth. We'll establish a formal co-parenting arrangement that respects both our roles." Blackwood studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I can accept those terms with one addition. If at any point your medical team advises that your living situation is inadequate for your condition, you'll reconsider the housing arrangement." It was a reasonable condition. Agreed. "Then we have a deal." He extended his hand across the table. I hesitated only briefly before shaking it. His grip was warm and firm, and I tried to ignore the slight tingle that ran up my arm at the contact. "I'll have HR prepare the paperwork for your promotion on Monday," he said, releasing my hand. "And I'll schedule an appointment with the top omega obstetrician in the city for next week." "Thank you." We spent the remainder of the meal discussing the practical details of our arrangement. By the time we finished, I felt cautiously optimistic that we could make this unusual situation work. As we prepared to leave, Blackwood surprised me with one final question. "Would you consider addressing me as Thaddius when we're discussing personal matters?" Blackwood seems unnecessarily formal given the circumstances. The request was reasonable, even thoughtful. "I suppose that's fair." Thaddius. His name felt strange on my tongue. Too intimate somehow. But I supposed everything about our relationship had shifted into unfamiliar territory. Thank you, Zane, he replied, using my first name for the first time. The sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected shiver through me. As I left the restaurant, I couldn't shake the feeling that despite all my careful boundaries and terms, I was stepping into something that would fundamentally change my life in ways I couldn't yet imagine. My new role as Special Projects Director began the following Monday. I arrived at the office to find I'd been moved to a spacious corner office on the executive floor just down the hall from Thaddius. My assistant Myra had been promoted alongside me and she was bubbling with excitement about our new positions. This is incredible, Zane, she said, gesturing around the office. The rumor mill is going crazy trying to figure out how you jumped 3 levels overnight. I set my bag down on the sleek new desk. What exactly are they saying? Myra hesitated. You don't want to know. Actually, I do. Better to be prepared, she sighed. The most popular theory is that you and Blackwood are having an affair. I kept my expression neutral despite the irony. And the other theories that you have something on him or that you landed some massive author that hasn't been announced yet. I nodded. Let them talk. Our results will speak for themselves. My first week in the new position was challenging but invigorating. I was tasked with evaluating cross-DEP departmental opportunities and identifying inefficiencies in our acquisition process. Work that was genuinely interesting and impactful. More importantly, the flexible hours allowed me to attend the numerous medical appointments Thaddius had arranged. The Omega specialist he'd selected, Dr. Winters, was among the best in the country. At our first appointment, she confirmed that male Omega pregnancies carried higher risks, but assured me that with proper care, both the baby and I could expect a healthy outcome. You'll need more frequent monitoring than a female Omega, she explained. And you'll likely experience more intense symptoms, particularly in the later trimesters. Male Omega bodies aren't naturally designed for childbearing, though they're certainly capable of it. Thaddius had insisted on accompanying me to the appointment. Sitting silently in the corner, absorbing every word of Dr. Winters' explanation with intense concentration. Any questions, Mr. Blackwood? Dr. Winters asked, clearly recognizing him as the alpha father. What specific accommodations should be made to ensure optimal health, he asked. Reduced stress, regular rest periods, excellent nutrition, and moderate exercise, she replied. Mr. Cooper will need to avoid long hours and high-pressure situations, particularly as the pregnancy progresses. Thaddius glanced at me and I could practically see him mentally adjusting my workload. As promised, we established a weekly meeting to discuss the pregnancy and other personal matters. These sessions were initially stilted and formal, but gradually evolved into more comfortable conversations. 3 weeks into our new arrangement, Thaddius surprised me by bringing takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant to our meeting. How did you know I like this place? I asked, opening the container of green curry. You had it delivered twice last week, he replied matter-of-factly. I pay attention. That statement, simple as it was, struck me. Thaddius Blackwood paid attention to details most people, most alphas especially, would ignore. It was what made him successful as a CEO. But it took on a different quality when applied to personal matters. Thank you, I said, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness. As we ate, our conversation drifted from pregnancy updates to work projects and eventually to books we'd both read recently. I was surprised to discover that beneath his intimidating exterior, Thaddius was deeply well-read and had insightful opinions on literature. I never would have pegged you as a Murakami fan, I admitted after a particularly engaging discussion about CFKA on the shore because I run a publishing house because you seem so pragmatic and results-oriented. Murakami is all about ambiguity and surrealism. That considered this while twirling noodles around his fork. Perhaps that's precisely why I enjoy his work. My daily life demands clarity and decisive action. His novels offer a different kind of thinking. It was a surprisingly self-aware observation, and I found myself reassessing my assumptions about him. Our working relationship took on a new dimension as well. That increasingly invited me to high-level meetings, valuing my perspective on projects outside my direct responsibility. When I successfully closed the deal with Jerome Walsh, bringing him to pinnacle with a 3-book contract, Thaddius publicly credited my strategy during the executive team meeting. Cooper's approach demonstrates exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need to remain competitive. He said, "Take note." The professional recognition was deeply satisfying, though it didn't stop the office gossip about my rapid promotion. I heard the whispers when I passed colleagues in the hallway and noticed how conversations sometimes halted when I entered the break room. By my 12th week of pregnancy, the morning sickness that had plagued me earlier began to ease. But new symptoms emerged. My body temperature fluctuated wildly and certain scents became overwhelming. Most challenging was my increased sensitivity to alpha pheromones, particularly Thaddius's. During one strategy meeting, he leaned over my shoulder to examine a report, and his proximity sent a wave of dizzying awareness through me. I inhaled sharply, earning a concerned glance from him. "Are you all right?" he murmured low enough that only I could hear. "Fine," I managed, though we both knew it was a lie. Later that day, he appeared in my office doorway. "We need to discuss something." I gestured for him to enter. "What is it?" He closed the door before speaking. "Your reaction to my proximity earlier. It's the pregnancy, isn't it?" There was no point denying it. Yes, omega pregnancy hormones increase sensitivity to alpha pheromones, especially the father's. Dr. Winters mentioned it might happen. Thaddius nodded. "I suspected as much. Would it help if I used scent blockers at the office?" The offer caught me off guard. Most alphas, especially those in leadership positions, considered their scent an integral part of their authority. Offering to suppress it was a significant concession. "That's thoughtful but unnecessary," I said. "I can manage. It's not a hardship. Zay. If it makes your workday more comfortable, I'm happy to accommodate." Again, that surprising consideration. "Thank you. But really, I'm fine. If it becomes too distracting, I'll let you know." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "As you wish. Our weekly dinner meeting is still on for tonight." "Yes. I'll be there." Since our arrangement began, our weekly meetings had evolved into dinner at his penthouse. I'd initially resisted, preferring neutral territory, but eventually conceded that the privacy was beneficial for our discussions. That evening, I arrived at his building in Chelsea. A sleek contemporary tower with stunning views of the Hudson. The doorman greeted me by name now, nodding me through to the private elevator that led directly to Thaddius's penthouse. When I stepped into his home, I found him in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, preparing dinner himself. "You cook?" I asked, unable to hide my surprise. He glanced up, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Did you think I survived solely on restaurant meals and personal chefs?" The thought had crossed my mind. "I find cooking therapeutic," he said, returning to the chopping board where he was precisely dicing vegetables. "It requires focus and precision, but also creativity." I leaned against the counter, watching his confident movements. "What are you making?" "Risotto with roasted vegetables. The recipe specifically includes nutrients recommended for omega pregnancies." The revelation that he'd researched pregnancy nutrition caught me off guard. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," he said simply. "Would you like something to drink?" "Sparkling water with lime, perhaps?" I nodded, touched by his attention to detail. Ever since learning of the pregnancy, he'd ensured his home was stocked with my preferred non-alcoholic beverages. As we settled into dinner, I found myself more relaxed in his presence than I'd ever been. The risotto was excellent, creamy without being heavy with perfectly roasted vegetables that maintain their distinct flavors. This is genuinely delicious, I admitted. You've been hiding your talents. A pleased expression crossed his face. I'm glad you enjoy it. Our conversation flowed easily, covering everything from publishing industry gossip to a recent exhibit at the Whitney that we both visited. It wasn't until we moved to his living room with tea that we approached more personal territory. Have you thought about when you want to announce the pregnancy at work? Thaddius asked, settling into the armchair across from me. I was hoping to wait until after the first trimester. I said, though I suppose the rumors are already running wild. Let them talk, he said, echoing my earlier sentiment. What matters is your comfort. I sipped my tea, considering my next words carefully. There's something I've been wondering about. Yes. That night in the elevator 2 months ago. We never discussed it. Thaddius's expression grew more serious. I assumed you preferred it that way. I did at the time. But given current circumstances, I find myself curious about your perspective on what happened. He set his cup down, giving the question his full attention. I had been attracted to you since I took over Pinnacle. Your intelligence, your determination, the way you carried yourself despite the challenges Omegas face in our industry, but I made a rule long ago not to pursue employees regardless of attraction. What changed that night? Perhaps it was the champagne or the confined space. Or simply that the tension had been building for months. When you looked at me in that elevator, I saw an invitation I couldn't refuse. I remembered the moment clearly. The way our eyes had locked. The electric current that had seemed to pass between us. The deliberate step I'd taken toward him. I don't regret it, I admitted softly. Though I never expected these consequences. Nor did I, he agreed. But I find myself increasingly at peace with them. Something in his tone made me look up sharply. What do you mean? Thaddius met my gaze directly. I mean that while this situation wasn't planned, I'm not sorry it's happened. The prospect of fatherhood is something I've considered abstractly for years but never pursued actively. And now that it's been decided for you, now I find myself wondering what our child will be like, he said. His expression softening. Whether they'll have your stubborn independence or my excessive focus on details. The simple sincerity of his words touched something deep within me. For the first time, I allowed myself to truly envision our child as a person, not just a complication. I hope they have your cooking skills, I said lightly, trying to ease the sudden emotional weight of the moment. Thaddius smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually serious face. And your literary taste. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. The implications of our conversation settling between us. It was the first time we'd spoken of the future with anything approaching optimism. As I prepared to leave later that evening, Thaddius walked me to the door as usual, but instead of our typical polite goodbye, he hesitated. May I ask you something personal, Zane? Of course. Have you told your family about the pregnancy yet? The question caught me off guard. No. Not yet. My relationship with my parents is complicated. They have very traditional views about Omega roles. Understanding flickered in his eyes. That's why independence is so important to you. Yes. I admitted growing up. They made it clear that an Omega's highest purpose was to find a suitable alpha and start a family. My academic and career ambitions were treated as temporary distractions at best and at worst as defiance of natural order. I smiled without humor. When I moved to New York and took suppressants, my father didn't speak to me for nearly a year. That's expression darkened. I'm sorry. That must have been difficult. It was. But it also strengthened my resolve. What about your family? Have you told them? A shadow crossed his face. My mother passed away 5 years ago. My father and I speak only when absolutely necessary, usually regarding company matters. Because of how he treated your mother, Thaddius nodded. He abandoned her when I was 14. leaving her to raise me and my sister alone while he started a new family with a younger Omega. The experience shaped my views on responsibility quite significantly. Suddenly, his insistence on being involved in my pregnancy made more sense. This wasn't just alpha possessiveness. It was a reaction against his father's abandonment. "I'd like to meet your sister sometime," I said, sensing he needed a shift in topic. "She sounds important to you." "She is. Lydia would like you." A small smile returned to his face. "She's been asking about you since I told her about the pregnancy." "You've told her about me?" "Of course. She's family." The casual inclusion of me in his concept of family conversation struck me more powerfully than I expected. For someone who had fought so hard for independence, the idea of being considered part of someone's family circle was both foreign and strangely appealing. "Well, good night, Thaddius," I said, suddenly needing space to process my conflicting emotions. "Good night, Zane. Text me when you get home." It had become our ritual, his subtle way of ensuring my safety without directly controlling my movements. Initially, I'd found it overbearing. Now, I recognized it as care expressed in the only way he knew how. As promised, I texted him when I arrived at my apartment. His reply came immediately. "Thank you. Rest well." 2 simple words that shouldn't have made me smile, but did. The next morning, I woke to nausea so severe that I barely made it to the bathroom in time. After 15 minutes of misery, I crawled back to bed and called Myra to let her know I'd be working from home. "Of course," she said sympathetically. "I'll reschedule your meetings and send over the Langford contract for review." "Thanks, Myra. You're a lifesaver." I managed to doze for another hour before my phone rang. Thaddius's name flashed on the screen. "Hello," I answered groggy. "Myra told me you're ill," he said without preamble. "Do you need anything?" "Just a normal functioning body," I muttered. "Morning sickness." Decided to make a comeback. "I'm sending over some ginger tea and crackers. Dr. Winters recommended them specifically for Omega pregnancy nausea." Before I could protest, he continued, "Don't argue, Zane. It's tea, not a life commitment." Despite my discomfort, I laughed. "Fine. Thank you." True to his word, a delivery arrived 20 minutes later with not only tea and crackers, but also a selection of bland, easily digestible foods and a note that simply read, "Rest. The work will wait. Tea." The gesture was thoughtful, practical, and unexpectedly tender. I found myself staring at the note, tracing the bold strokes of his handwriting with my finger. What was happening between us? In the span of a few short weeks, we'd moved from awkward co-parents to something that felt dangerously close to friendship. Or perhaps something more, if the flutter in my chest when he smiled was any indication. No, I couldn't afford to develop feelings for Thaddius Blackwood. He was my boss, the father of my child, and an alpha with inherent power over me professionally and biologically. Emotional entanglement would only complicate an already complex situation. I pushed the thoughts aside and focused on feeling well enough to review the Langford contract. By afternoon, the nausea had subsided enough for me to work productively from my couch. Cup of ginger tea in hand, my phone buzzed with a text from Thaddius. "Feeling any better?" "Much?" I replied. "The tea helped." "Thank you." "Good. Take tomorrow off if needed." "I'll be fine to come in." "Stubborn as always," came his response, followed by a rare emoji, a small smile that seemed oddly intimate coming from him. I found myself smiling back at the phone like a teenager with a crush. This had to stop. The following day, I arrived at the office determined to re-establish professional boundaries. I dressed in my most formal suit, kept my interactions with Thaddius strictly business-related and focused intently on my work. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Late that afternoon, As I was reviewing quarterly projections, a sharp knock at my door interrupted my concentration. I looked up to find Lydia Blackwood, Thaddius's sister, recognizable from company events, standing in my doorway with a mischievous smile. "So, you're the famous Zane Cooper," she said, entering without waiting for an invitation. I had to see for myself the Omega who's turned my brother's well-ordered world upside down. I stood, extending my hand professionally despite her casual approach. "Miss Blackwood, I wasn't aware you were visiting the office today. Please call me Lydia. And no, Thaddius doesn't know I'm here." She took my hand, but instead of shaking it, she used it to pull me into a quick, unexpected hug. I wanted to meet you without his hovering presence, unsure how to respond to this whirlwind of familiarity. I gestured for her to sit. "Can I offer you something to drink?" "No. Thank you. I can't stay long." She studied me intently. "You're exactly as Thaddius described you." "And how is that exactly?" "Poised. Professional. Guarded," she said with a knowing smile. "But he failed to mention how attractive you are. No wonder he's been acting so strange lately." "Strange how?" I asked, curiosity overriding my determination to maintain boundaries. "Distracted, checking his phone constantly. Actually leaving the office at reasonable hours." She leaned forward, conspirator ally. "Do you know he's been reading books on Omega pregnancy? Actual physical books. Not just articles. I haven't seen him this focused on a personal matter in years." I wasn't sure how to process this information. "We have a complicated situation to navigate. A baby isn't just a situation," she said, her expression softening. "It's a little miracle. And I have to tell you." Seeing my perpetually controlled brother thrown completely off balance by impending fatherhood is its own kind of miracle. He seems to be handling it quite practically from my perspective. Lydia laughed. "That's his coping mechanism. Trust me. Beneath all that pragmatism, he's experiencing every emotion possible. He just doesn't know how to express it." Before I could respond, my office door opened again and Thaddius himself appeared looking uncharacteristically flustered. "Lydia," he said, his tone a mix of surprise and weariness. "I thought we were meeting for dinner." "We were. But I decided to come early and introduce myself to Zane." She stood smiling innocently. "We were just getting acquainted." Thaddius's gaze shifted between us, clearly trying to assess what might have been discussed. "I see. Don't worry, brother. Dear. I didn't share any embarrassing childhood stories." She winked at me. "Saving those for next time." Thaddius aside. "Zane. I apologize for my sister's intrusion." "No need," I assured him. "It was a pleasure meeting her." "See. He likes me," Lydia said triumphantly. "Now, shall we go to dinner?" "Zane, you're welcome to join us." The invitation caught me off guard. Dinner with both Blackwood siblings felt like crossing a line from professional arrangement into personal territory. "Thank you, but I have plans this evening," I lied smoothly. Thaddius gave me a look that suggested he knew I was lying but appreciated the boundary. "Another time perhaps." Lydia seemed disappointed but accepted my refusal gracefully. "I'll hold you to that. Zane Cooper. I want to know everything about the man carrying my future niece or nephew." After they left, I sat back in my chair, processing the encounter. Lydia Blackwood was everything her brother wasn't. Warm, expressive, immediately familiar. Yet, there was an underlying similarity in their intense focus and perceptiveness. More unsettling were her revelations about Thaddius's behavior. The image of him reading pregnancy books, checking his phone for my messages, altering his workaholic schedule. It painted a picture of investment beyond mere obligation. And worst of all, I found I liked that picture entirely too much. As my pregnancy progressed into the 4th month, keeping it private became increasingly difficult. the subtle changes in my appearance, my frequent doctor appointments, and my new dietary habits sparked curiosity throughout Pinnacle Publishing. The whispers and speculation grew louder each day. Thaddius and I decided it was time to make an official announcement. We agreed I would tell the executive team in person while a general statement would be distributed to the rest of the company, confirming the pregnancy but keeping details of the father's identity private. "Are you sure you don't want me there when you tell the executives?" Thaddius asked during our weekly dinner meeting. "I'm sure," I replied firmly. "If you're there, it will only fuel the rumors that we're involved." "We are involved," he pointed out, "just not in the way they assume. All the more reason to maintain professional boundaries in public." I took a sip of water. "Besides, I need to establish that this pregnancy won't affect my job performance. Having the CEO hovering protectively won't help that image." Thaddius nodded reluctantly. "As you wish. But know that I'm available if you need support." That simple offer of support, free from demands or conditions, had become a hallmark of our evolving relationship. Over the past weeks, I'd noticed a gradual shift in how we interacted. Less tension, more natural conversation, occasional moments where his carefully maintained control seemed to slip, revealing glimpses of a different man beneath the CEO facade. The executive team meeting was scheduled for Monday morning. I arrived early, preparing myself mentally for the reactions I might face. As the room filled with Pinnacle senior leadership, I felt a mix of nervousness and determination. When the regular agenda items concluded, I asked for the floor. "I have a personal announcement to make." I began, keeping my voice steady. "I'm expecting a child. I'm currently 16 weeks pregnant." The reactions ranged from surprise to knowing looks. Victoria Hughes, our marketing director, immediately offered congratulations. Others followed suit, though I could see the questions in their eyes, particularly about the father. "I appreciate your support," I continued. "I want to assure everyone that I remain fully committed to my role and responsibilities at Pinnacle. My doctor has confirmed I can continue working throughout most of my pregnancy, though I will be taking the standard parental leave when the time comes." "Congratulations, Zane," said Robert Chin, our CFO. "Will you be sharing any details about the father?" I'd prepared for this question. "I'm choosing to keep those details private for now." "I hope you'll respect that decision." The meeting continued and I fielded a few more personal questions before we returned to business matters. Overall, the announcement went as well as I could have hoped. Later that afternoon, the company-wide email went out and my inbox immediately flooded with congratulatory messages. Myra brought in a small bouquet of flowers that the administrative team had collected for, a gesture that touched me unexpectedly. By the end of the day, I was emotionally drained but relieved to have the news in the open. As I gathered my things to leave, Thaddius appeared in my doorway. "How did it go?" he asked quietly. "Better than expected. A few probing questions, but nothing I couldn't handle," he nodded. "The official announcement seems to have been well received." "Yes. Though I'm sure the speculation about the father will only intensify." A shadow crossed his face. "Does that bother you?" The question surprised me. I'm used to being the subject of office gossip. It comes with being one of the few omegas in leadership. "That's not what I asked, Zane." I sighed, recognizing that he was pushing for honesty. "What bothers me is the underlying assumption that as an omega, my personal life is somehow public property. That my reproductive choices are up for debate and discussion." "I understand," he said, and I believed he did. "For what it's worth, I've instructed HR to make it clear that speculation about your personal life is inappropriate and potentially grounds for disciplinary action." "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to." His expression softened slightly. "Would you like a ride home? It's raining." I glanced out the window, nodding the downpour that had started while we were talking. I planned to take the subway, but the thought of navigating crowded platforms and potentially wet stairs in my increasingly fatigued state was unappealing. "That would be appreciated." "Thank you." During the car ride, Thaddius was uncharacteristically quiet, staring out at the rain-slick streets with a pensive expression. "Something on your mind?" I finally asked. He turned to me. "I'm considering making a public statement about my role in your pregnancy." I stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "To end the speculation, to publicly acknowledge my responsibility and support." "We agreed to keep that private," I reminded him, feeling a surge of anxiety. "At least for now." "I know. And I'll respect your wishes." He hesitated. "But I want you to know that I'm not ashamed of this situation, Zane, of being the father of your child." Something in his tone made my chest tight. "I never thought you were. Haven't you?" His gaze was piercing. "You've been so insistent on keeping our arrangement private." I wondered if perhaps you were embarrassed to be linked to me. That idea was so absurd. I almost laughed. "Thaddius, you're one of the most eligible alphas in Manhattan. If anything, people would wonder what you're doing with me." His expression darkened. "Do you really think so little of yourself?" Before I could respond, the car pulled up outside my apartment building. The rain had intensified, coming down in sheets. "Wait here," Thaddius instructed the driver. "I'll walk Zane to his door." Despite my protests, he emerged from the car with a large black umbrella, coming around to my side to escort me through the downpour. As we walked the short distance to my building entrance, his hand rested protectively at the small of my back. At my door, I turned to thank him, but the words died in my throat. He was standing closer than I'd realized, his eyes intent on my face, droplets of rain clinging to his dark hair. "You never answered my question," he said softly. "Which question?" "Do you really think so little of yourself?" I swallowed hard. "I'm pragmatic, Thaddius. An omega in a junior executive position, suddenly pregnant by the CEO. From the outside, it looks like a cliché at best, a scandal at worst. And from the inside, how does it look to you?" The question felt dangerous, probing at emotions I'd been carefully avoiding. "Complicated," I finally answered. "Unexpected. Still evolving." His gaze softened. "That's a fair assessment." For a moment, we stood in silence, the rain drumming on the umbrella above us, creating a small private world in the middle of the city's storm. "I should go in," I said, breaking the spell. Thaddius nodded. "Rest well, Zay. I'll see you tomorrow." As I watched him walk back to the waiting car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between us. A subtle change in the gravity that kept us orbiting each other at a careful distance. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and doctor appointments. My pregnancy was progressing normally, though Dr. Winters continued to monitor me closely due to the higher risks associated with male omega pregnancies. "Your blood pressure is slightly elevated," she noted during one checkup. "Nothing alarming yet, but I want you to reduce your stress levels." I laughed humorlessly. "Easier said than done." "I mean it, Zane. Male omega pregnancies are more susceptible to complications from stress hormones. You need to prioritize rest and relaxation." Thaddius, who had taken to attending every appointment despite my initial objections, immediately seized on this advice. "You're working too hard," he said on the ride back to the office. "I've noticed you staying late again." "There's a lot to do before I take leave," I defended. "The Berkshire acquisition needs oversight, and we're still finalizing the spring list. Those are company concerns, not exclusively yours," he countered. "You have a team for a reason," says the man who regularly works 14-hour days. "I'm not pregnant," he pointed out. I couldn't argue with that logic, but the idea of reducing my workload felt like surrender. "I'll try to delegate more," I conceded. True to my word, I attempted to scale back, but a new complication arose the following week. Meridian Press, our biggest competitor, published a thinly veiled blind item in an industry newsletter, suggesting that a prominent publishing house CEO had engaged in an inappropriate relationship with a recently promoted Omega executive. Though no names were mentioned, the implication was clear to anyone in the industry. Thaddius was furious when the article crossed his desk. "This is deliberate sabotage," he fumed during an emergency meeting with our PR team, designed to undermine both Zane's professional standing and Pinnacle's reputation. "It's a baseless rumor," our PR director assured him, without specifics. "It will blow over." But the damage was already being done. I noticed the changed atmosphere immediately. Sidelong glances in the hallways. Conversations that halted when I approached. Emails questioning decisions I'd made months ago. The following Monday, I arrived at work to find an email from our largest author questioning whether her next book would receive proper attention given the apparent turmoil in leadership. It was the first tangible impact on our business. And it hit me hard. I was sitting at my desk composing a careful response when Thaddius entered my office without knocking. "Cancel your meetings today," he said without preamble. I looked up in surprise. "Why?" "Because we're addressing the situation head-on." His expression was resolute. "I've scheduled a press conference for noon." "A press conference?" I stood up alarmed. "That will only draw more attention to the rumors. The rumors are already doing damage. Ignoring them isn't working." He met my gaze directly. "I want to publicly acknowledge that I'm the father of your child and that our relationship, while personal, has been conducted with complete professional integrity." "That's exactly what they want," I argued. "To force us into a defensive position to make this a scandal. What they want is to undermine your authority and question your qualifications." He countered. "I won't allow that." "This isn't your decision alone," I reminded him. Anger flaring. "This is my career, my reputation, my life that's being examined under a microscope." His expression softened slightly. "You're right. I apologize for overstepping. But Zane, we need to address this somehow." I took a deep breath, trying to think strategically rather than emotionally. "Not with a press conference. That's too reactive, too dramatic. What do you suggest?" "An interview, perhaps with someone respected in the industry. We present our side calmly, professionally, without the spectacle." Thaddius considered this publishers weekly. "They've been fair to Pinnacle in the past." "Yes, that could work." I sat back down, my mind already formulating the approach. "We acknowledge the personal relationship, but emphasize the timeline of my career achievements. Make it clear that my promotion was based on merit, not favoritism. And the pregnancy we presented as what it is. An unexpected but welcome development in our personal lives that we're navigating responsibly." He nodded slowly. "I'll have PR set it up." He paused. "Thank you for the more measured approach. Sometimes I react too forcefully when something feels threatening." The admission of vulnerability was unexpected. "It's understandable," I said. "You're protective by nature. Of things that matter to me." "Yes." Our eyes met, and I felt that now familiar flutter in my chest. The idea that I mattered to Thaddius Blackwood beyond just carrying his child was becoming harder to ignore. The publishers' weekly interview was scheduled for the following week. We prepared carefully, anticipating difficult questions and crafting responses that were honest without being overly revealing. The day before the interview, I was reviewing our talking points when a notification popped up on my computer screen. An email from an address I hadn't seen in years, but instantly recognized. Lucas Donovan, my ex from college. The alpha who had systematically broken down my confidence, isolated me from friends, and tried to convince me that my academic ambitions were selfish and unnatural for an Omega. My hands shook as I opened the message. "Zane, I saw the industry rumors. Sleeping your way to the top. Some things never change. Remember how you used to pretend you were too good for traditional Omega roles? Looks like you found your place after all. If you're spreading your legs for your boss, Maybe you should have stayed with me. At least I was honest about what I wanted from you. The crude message continued, dredging up painful memories and twisting them into something ugly. By the time I finished reading, nausea that had nothing to do with my pregnancy roiled in my stomach. I closed the email, trying to steady my breathing. Lucas had been out of my life for 6 years. I'd blocked his number, his email, his social media, or so I thought. He must have created a new account specifically to reach me. The thought of him monitoring my career, waiting for an opportunity to resurface, made my skin crawl. Worse was the realization that if he had seen the industry rumors, he might try to insert himself into the narrative, perhaps contacting journalists with his own twisted version of our past relationship. I debated whether to tell Thaddius about Lucas's message. On one hand, he should be prepared if Lucas tried to publicly undermine us. On the other, discussing my abusive ex felt too personal, too revealing of past vulnerabilities I preferred to keep private. In the end, the decision was made for me. During our final prep session that evening, Thaddius noticed my distraction. "What's wrong?" he asked directly. "You seem unsettled." I hesitated, then decided honesty was necessary. I received an email from someone from my past. Someone who might try to complicate our situation. Thaddius frowned. "In what way?" "His name is Lucas Donovan. We dated in college." I swallowed hard. "It didn't end well." "Define didn't end well," Thaddius said, his voice carefully neutral. "He was controlling, manipulative. When I finally ended things, he tried to sabotage my academic standing. The memories were still painful. He's the reason I'm so cautious about alpha-omega power dynamics." Thaddius's expression darkened. "And he's contacting you now after all this time." He saw the rumors. Decided to share his charming perspective on my character. I tried for a light tone but failed miserably. "What exactly did he say?" "Zane?" "Nothing worth repeating." Thaddius held out his hand. "Show me the email." "That's not necessary. Please." Something in his tone made it clear this wasn't a request he'd easily abandon. Reluctantly, I forwarded Lucas's message to him. Watching Thaddius read, it was like witnessing a storm gather. His jaw tightened, his shoulders tensed, and a dangerous glint appeared in his eyes. "This person," he said, his voice, deceptively calm, "has no place in your life or our child's future." "I'm well aware of that," I said. "I've kept him out of my life for 6 years. I only mentioned him because he might try to contact the press." "He won't," Thaddius said with absolute certainty. "You can't know that. I can ensure it." There was something in his tone that sent a chill down my spine. "May I have your permission to address this situation?" "What exactly does address mean in this context?" "Nothing illegal," he assured me. "Simply a clear message that his interference will have consequences." Part of me wanted to handle Lucas myself to prove I didn't need an alpha to fight my battles. But another part recognized that Thaddius had resources and influence I didn't, and that pregnancy had made me more vulnerable than I cared to admit. "Fine," I conceded. "But I want to know what you're planning." "A simple conversation," he said. "Nothing more." I should have pressed for details, but exhaustion was setting in. "Just don't do anything that could reflect badly on Pinnacle. We have enough PR challenges at the moment." Thaddius nodded. "Get some rest, Zane. I'll pick you up for the interview tomorrow at 10 o'clock. The next morning, I woke feeling anxious but determined. The publishers' weekly interview was our opportunity to reshape the narrative, to present our relationship on our terms rather than through the lens of gossip and speculation. I dressed carefully in a charcoal suit that downplayed my slightly rounded abdomen while still looking professional. At precisely 10 o'clock, Thaddius's car arrived and I headed downstairs. He was waiting beside the vehicle, impeccably dressed as always. But something in his demeanor seemed different. A tension in his shoulders, a hardness around his eyes that hadn't been there yesterday. "Good morning," I said cautiously. "Everything all right?" "Perfectly fine," he replied, opening the car door for me. "You look well rested." The drive to the publisher's weekly office was quiet. Thaddius responding to my attempts at conversation with uncharacteristically short answers. Something had happened, but it was clear he didn't want to discuss it now. The interview itself went smoothly. The journalist, a beta woman with a reputation for fairness, asked direct but respectful questions about our relationship timeline, my qualifications for promotion, and how we plan to balance personal and professional boundaries. "To be clear," she said toward the end, "your romantic relationship began after Mr. Cooper's promotion to Special Projects Director. Our relationship isn't easily categorized." Thaddius replied smoothly. "We developed a personal connection which led to unexpected circumstances. Zane's promotion was based entirely on his exceptional performance and the strategic needs of the company. And how do you respond to suggestions that this situation creates an inappropriate power dynamic?" I answered this one. "We're both acutely aware of the potential for imbalance. That's why we've established clear boundaries between our personal and professional interactions. My reporting structure has been adjusted to include oversight from our board, ensuring my evaluations and advancement opportunities remain merit-based." The journalist seemed satisfied with our responses, and the interview concluded on a positive note. "That went well," I said as we left the building. "I think we presented a united, professional front." Thaddius nodded absently, checking his phone. "Yes, I believe so. Now, are you going to tell me what's bothering you?" I asked directly. "You've been distracted all morning." He looked up, his expression unreadable. "I spoke with Lucas Donovan last night." My stomach dropped. "What? How did you even find him?" "I have resources," he said simply. I thought it best to address the potential threat immediately. "And what exactly did this addressing entail?" I demanded, a mix of anger and anxiety rising in me. I made it clear that any attempt to interfere in your life or damage your reputation would have significant consequences. "What kind of consequences, Thaddius?" He met my gaze directly. "Financial ones primarily. Mr. Donovan works for a publishing services company that does substantial business with several houses owned by Blackwood Media Group." I simply pointed out that this connection could be jeopardized by any unprofessional behavior on his part. I stared at him speechless. The calculated precision of his approach was both impressive and disturbing. "You threatened his livelihood," I finally said. "I protected what's mine," he countered, then immediately appeared to regret his choice of words. "What I mean is—" "I know exactly what you mean," I interrupted, anger flaring. "You see me as a possession. Something to be controlled and defended according to your alpha instincts. That's not fair, Zane. Isn't it? You tracked down my ex without my knowledge or consent. You leveraged your corporate power to threaten him. How is that different from the controlling behavior I left him to escape?" Hurt flashed in Thaddius's eyes. "I was trying to protect you. I never asked for your protection. I asked for your respect, which would include consulting me before taking unilateral action in matters concerning my life." We had reached the car, but I suddenly couldn't bear the thought of being confined with him. "I'll take a cab back to the office," I said stiffly. "Zane, please let's discuss this rationally." "There's nothing rational about what you did," I snapped. "You behaved exactly like the domineering alpha stereotype I've spent my life avoiding." His expression hardened. "He threatened you, insulted you. I refuse to apologize for ensuring he doesn't do it again. That wasn't your decision to make. Our child's well-being is absolutely my decision," he countered, his voice rising. "Your stress levels directly impact our baby. Did you consider that while defending your precious independence?" The accusation hit like a physical blow. "Don't you dare use this pregnancy to justify controlling behavior." A few passers-by had begun to notice our heated exchange. Thaddius seemed to realize we were creating a scene and visibly reined in his emotions. "This isn't the place for this discussion," he said more quietly. "Please get in the car. We can continue this privately." "No. I need space right now." I stepped back from him. "I'll see you at the office tomorrow." Without waiting for his response, I turned and walked away, hailing a passing taxi. As I slid into the back seat, I glanced back to see Thaddius standing motionless on the sidewalk, watching me leave with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Back at my apartment, the full weight of our confrontation hit me. I sank onto my couch, one hand resting protectively on my stomach. Where our child grew oblivious to the turmoil between its parents. Had I overreacted? Perhaps. But Thaddius's actions had triggered every warning bell from my past. The unilateral decision-making, the alpha protectiveness that blurred into control, the assumption that his judgment superseded mine in matters concerning my own life. And yet his intentions seemed genuinely protective rather than possessive. He hadn't threatened Lucas to demonstrate dominance, but to prevent potential harm to me and our child. The lines between protection and control, between care and possession, had become blurred in a way I wasn't prepared to navigate. My phone buzzed with a text from Thaddius. "I apologize for overstepping. You're right to be angry. When you're ready to talk, I'm here." The simple acknowledgement of my feelings without defensiveness or demands caught me off guard. It wasn't what I expected from an alpha in his position. Before I could decide how to respond, another text came through. "For what it's worth, I don't see you as a possession, Zane. I see you as someone I've come to care about deeply. That doesn't excuse my actions, but I hope it helps explain them." Care about deeply? The words echoed in my mind, stirring emotions I'd been trying desperately to suppress. Because the truth was, despite all my careful boundaries and rational objections, I'd begun to care deeply for Thaddius, too, and that terrified me more than anything else. I didn't respond to Thaddius's text that night. I needed time to process what had happened, to sort through my conflicting emotions about his intervention with Lucas. Part of me was still angry at the overstepping of boundaries, but another part, a part one was reluctant to acknowledge, felt a certain comfort in knowing someone cared enough to defend me so fiercely. The next morning, I called in sick. I couldn't face the office. Couldn't face him until I'd made some decisions about our relationship. Myra asked no questions. Simply rescheduled my meetings and promised to handle anything urgent. I spent the day wandering my apartment, alternately rehearsing confrontations and reconciliations. By evening, I still hadn't reached any conclusions, but the baby had been unusually active. As if sensing my turmoil, each flutter and kick reminded me that my decisions now affected more than just my own life. When my doorbell rang at 7 o'clock, I knew without checking who it would be. Thaddius stood in the hallway holding a small paper bag, his expression uncharacteristically uncertain. "May I come in?" he asked quietly. I stepped aside, allowing him entry. He placed the bag on my coffee table before turning to face me. "I brought the ginger candies, Dr. Winters recommended for nausea," he explained. "Myra mentioned you weren't feeling well." "Thank you," I said, suddenly aware of how exhausted I felt. "Would you like to sit?" He nodded, taking a seat on my couch while I settled into the armchair opposite. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the tension between us almost tangible. "I crossed a line," Thaddius finally said. "I should have consulted you before approaching Lucas." "Yes. You should have. I was trying to protect you. But I see now how my actions mirrored the controlling behavior you've worked so hard to avoid." He met my gaze directly. "I'm sorry, Zane. Truly." His sincerity caught me off guard. I'd expected justifications, perhaps even the dismissive attitude so common to alphas accustomed to power. Instead, he offered a genuine apology and acknowledgement of my perspective. "Thank you for saying that," I said, softening slightly. But I need to understand why you reacted so strongly. This wasn't just alpha protectiveness. Was it? Thaddius was quiet for a moment. His expression thoughtful. No. It wasn't just that. When I read what he wrote to you, how he tried to diminish everything you've achieved, something in me just snapped. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of discomfort. I couldn't bear the thought of him hurting you again. Why? I pressed, needing to hear him articulate what had been developing between us. He looked up, his gaze unwavering. Because somewhere along the way, between board meetings and doctor appointments, between negotiating boundaries and sharing meals, I've fallen in love with you, Zane. The words hung in the air between us, changing everything and nothing at once. Because deep down I'd known perhaps we both had. I know this complicates things. He continued when I didn't immediately respond. I know your independence is vital to you and that a relationship with me might seem like a threat to that. I'm not asking you to return my feelings or to change our arrangement. I just needed you to understand why Lucas's message affected me so deeply. I took a deep breath trying to organize my thoughts. I haven't allowed myself to think about what I feel for you. I admitted. It seemed too risky, too complicated. And now I'm terrified, I said honestly. Not of you exactly, but of what loving an alpha like you might mean for the life I've built. For the person I've fought to become? Hope flickered in his eyes. Does that mean you do have feelings for me? I nodded slowly. Yes. Despite all my careful boundaries and rational objections. I've fallen for you, too. The admission felt both liberating and frightening, like stepping off a cliff with no guarantee of what waited below. So where does that leave us? Thaddius asked quietly. I don't know, I admitted. I need you to understand something fundamental about me. Thaddius. My independence isn't a quirk or a phase or something I'll eventually outgrow. It's essential to who I am. Any relationship we might have would need to honor that. I understand, he said, leaning forward. And I would never want to change who you are. It's your strength, your determination, your unbending will that I admire most. Even when it frustrates you. A small smile touched his lips. Especially then. I felt my own smile forming in response. We would need rules. Boundaries. Of course. And you would have to accept that I won't always make the choices you think are best for me or for the baby. His expression grew more serious. I can accept that. Though I can't promise I won't express my opinions forcefully at times. I wouldn't expect anything less. I acknowledged. But expressing an opinion is different from making unilateral decisions that affect my life. Agreed, he hesitated. May I ask what specifically you plan to do about Lucas? Nothing. I said simply. He's not worth my energy or attention. If he contacts me again, I'll handle it through proper channels. A restraining order if necessary. Thaddius nodded. Though I could see it took effort for him to accept my decision. I'll respect that approach. We sat in silence for a moment. The new understanding between us settling like a physical presence in the room. I should go, Thaddius said eventually. You need rest. As he stood to leave, a sharp pain lanced through my abdomen, causing me to gasp and double over. Zane. Thaddius was instantly beside me, his face tight with concern. What's wrong? I don't know. I managed through gritted teeth. Something doesn't feel right. Another pain hit. This one worse than the first. I felt a sudden wetness between my legs and looked down in horror to see blood soaking through my pants. We need to go to the hospital now, Thaddius said. His voice deadly calm despite the panic in his eyes. He pulled out his phone, calling his driver while supporting me with his other arm. Stay with me, Zane. Everything will be all right. I wanted to believe him. But the pain was intensifying and fear for our baby overwhelmed me. It's too early, I whispered. Only 5 months. It's too early. Don't think about that now, he said, guiding me carefully toward the door. Just focus on breathing. The next few hours passed in a blur of emergency room lights, concerned medical staff, and 4 medications to stop the contractions. Thaddius never left my side, holding my hand through examinations and tests. His presence a steady anchor in the chaos. Finally, a specialist in omega male pregnancies arrived. Dr. Kaplan was a tall, authoritative woman with kind eyes and a reassuring manner. The good news is we've stopped the contractions, she explained after examining me thoroughly. The bleeding has slowed and the baby's heartbeat is strong. What caused this? Thaddius asked, his fingers still entwined with mine. A placental abruption, though thankfully a minor one. This is unfortunately more common in male omega pregnancies. She turned to me. Have you been under unusual stress recently, Mr. Cooper? I thought of the workplace rumors, the confrontation with Thaddius, the emotional turmoil of the past weeks. Yes. I admitted that's likely a contributing factor. Male omega bodies are not naturally designed for pregnancy, so they're more sensitive to stress hormones. Her expression grew serious. You'll need complete bed rest for at least the next 2 weeks, followed by significantly reduced activity for the remainder of your pregnancy. 2 weeks. I repeated, my mind immediately spinning through work projects and commitments. That's not possible. I have deadlines. Meetings. What's not possible is negotiating with medical necessity. Dr. Kaplan interrupted firmly. This was a warning sign, Mr. Cooper. The next episode could result in premature delivery or worse. Thaddius's hand tightened around mine. He'll follow your recommendations exactly, he assured her. I'll make sure of it. I wanted to argue but was too exhausted and frightened to do more than nod in reluctant agreement. We'd like to keep you overnight for observation, Dr. Kaplan continued. If everything remains stable, you can go home tomorrow with strict instructions for your recovery. After she left, Thaddius sank into the chair beside my hospital bed, the strain of the evening evident in the lines of his face. You should go home, I told him. There's nothing you can do here. And you look exhausted. I'm not leaving you, he said simply. Thaddius. This isn't negotiable, Zane. His voice was gentle but firm. Not because I'm trying to control the situation, but because I love you and I'm terrified. Please let me stay. Put like that I couldn't refuse. All right, he nodded. Then hesitated. There's something we need to discuss. Your living situation. I tensed, anticipating the direction of this conversation. Bed rest in your 5th floor walk-up isn't practical. He continued carefully. You need proper care. Meals delivered, someone to help with basic needs. Much as I hated to admit it, he was right. My apartment wasn't equipped for this situation, and I had no family nearby to help. What do you suggest? I asked, already knowing the answer. Move into my penthouse. You'll have your own suite, complete privacy when you want it. And I can arrange for a nurse during the day while I'm at work. 6 months ago, I would have rejected the offer outright, seeing it as an alpha attempt to control me. Now I could recognize it for what it was. A practical solution offered from a place of genuine concern. Just until I'm stable enough to return to my own place, I stipulated. Of course. Thaddius agreed quickly. This isn't about changing our living arrangement permanently. It's about doing what's best for you and the baby right now. I sighed, acknowledging the wisdom of his suggestion, despite my instinctive resistance. All right. But I'll need some things from my apartment. I'll have Myra coordinate getting whatever you need. He leaned forward, pressing a gentle kiss to my forehead. Thank you for trusting me with this, Zane. I promise I won't take advantage. True to his word, Thaddius transformed his guest suite into a comfortable recovery space for me. The room was spacious and filled with natural light with a private bathroom. a small sitting area, and even a desk where I could work within the limited hours Dr. Kaplan had authorized. My first week on bed rest was frustrating and humbling. Used to complete independence, I chafed at the restrictions and the need to accept help for even simple tasks. Thaddius hired a nurse named Michael who came during weekdays. A beta male with a calm demeanor who respected my privacy while ensuring I followed doctor's orders. Thaddius himself was attentive without being overbearing, checking in regularly but giving me space when I needed it. In the evenings, he would join me for dinner in my suite, updating me on work matters and bringing books he thought I might enjoy. Gradually, I adjusted to the new reality of my restricted lifestyle. The baby stabilized with no further bleeding or contractions, which Dr. Kaplan called very encouraging during her home visit. After 2 weeks of strict bed rest, I was allowed limited movement around the penthouse and up to 2 hours of work-related activities daily. It wasn't ideal, but it was progress. One evening, as we sat in the living room after dinner, my first meal outside my suite since moving in, Thaddius broached a topic we'd been avoiding. The PR team says the publisher's weekly interview has effectively neutralized most of the negative speculation. He reported. The board is satisfied with how we've handled the situation. That's good news, I said, relieved that at least one source of stress had been resolved. There's something else we should discuss. He sat down his tea. Your parental leave is scheduled to begin in 3 months. Have you thought about what happens after? I had been deliberately avoiding this question, focusing instead on the immediate challenges of my high-risk pregnancy. Not in detail, I admitted. I've been thinking about it, he said carefully. About our child's future and ours. The seriousness in his tone made me pay closer attention. What specifically? I want us to raise our child together, Zane. Not just as co-parents sharing custody, but as a family. My heart rate accelerated. What exactly are you proposing? I'm not asking you to move in permanently or to give up your independence. He clarified quickly. But I am asking you to consider a more integrated approach to parenting. Perhaps adjacent apartments in the same building with a connecting door, separate spaces that can become shared when appropriate. The suggestion was thoughtful, addressing my need for autonomy while acknowledging our evolving relationship. That's actually a reasonable idea, I conceded. There's more, he continued, looking uncharacteristically nervous. I'd like us to try building a genuine relationship alongside our co-parenting arrangement. Dotting essentially, but with the complexity of already expecting a child together. I couldn't help a small smile. That's not the traditional order of operations. Nothing about our situation has been traditional, he pointed out, returning my smile. But I find I don't mind that at all. So, you want to date me while I'm carrying your child and living in your guest suite? That's quite the modern arrangement. I want to love you, Zane, he said simply. However you'll allow me to. The raw honesty in his voice touched something deep within me. For all his power and control in the business world, Thaddius was making himself vulnerable in a way few alphas ever would. I think I'd like that, I said softly. Though I can't promise I'll be easy to love. I'm stubborn and fiercely independent and perfect. He interrupted. You're perfect exactly as you are. I don't want easy, Zane. I want you. He reached for my hand and I allowed him to take it. Our fingers intertwining in silent acknowledgement of this new territory we were entering together. The next 2 months passed with surprising ease. My health stabilized. The baby continued to grow normally, and Thaddius and I settled into a comfortable routine that honored both my need for independence and our growing relationship. True to his word, he never pressured me, never pushed beyond the boundaries I established. Our dates were often simple evenings at home, conversations over dinner, or watching classic films in his media room. Occasionally, when Dr. Kaplan approved, we ventured out for short walks in the park or quiet dinners at restaurants near the penthouse. Slowly, I began to trust that Thaddius's feelings for me weren't about possession or control, but genuine respect and affection. For perhaps the first time in my life, I allowed myself to believe that love and independence weren't mutually exclusive. Everything was proceeding smoothly until the day Lucas Donovan appeared at Pinnacle Publishing's reception desk demanding to see me. I was working from home that day, so Myra called me immediately. "He's making quite a scene," she reported. "Security is handling it, but he's threatening to go to the press with the real story if you don't meet with him." My blood ran cold. "Has anyone told Thaddius?" "Not yet. I wanted to check with you first." "Thank you, Myra. I'll handle it from here." After ending the call, I paced my suite, weighing my options. The sensible choice was to inform Thaddius immediately, but I hesitated, remembering our argument about his previous intervention with Lucas. This was my problem to solve, my past to confront. After several minutes of internal debate, I called Lucas directly. He answered immediately, finally decided to face me. "Zane." His voice was exactly as I remembered, smooth and pleasant on the surface with an undercurrent of meanness. "What do you want, Lucas?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "A conversation in person about old times and new developments." "That's not going to happen." He laughed, a sound that once made my stomach clench with anxiety. "Then I guess I'll have to share my insights about your character with that journalist who wrote such a sympathetic piece about you and your alpha CEO. You have nothing of value to share," I said more confidently than I felt. "Our relationship ended 6 years ago. Ancient history, is it? Because I think people would be very interested to know how you manipulated me back then, using your omega wiles to advance your academic career while stringing me along." It was a complete inversion of reality. He had been the manipulator trying to sabotage my studies and isolate me from friends. But Lucas had always been skilled at twisting the truth. "No one would believe such obvious lies," I said. "And making false statements to the press could be considered defamation. It would be your word against mine. And unlike you, I don't have an obvious motive to lie. I'm not the one sleeping with my boss." The crude implication made my anger flare. "This conversation is over, Lucas. If you contact me or anyone at Pinnacle again, I'll file for a restraining order. You always were a coward." He sneered, hiding behind rules and procedures instead of facing reality. "Your alpha might think you're special, but I know what you really are. Just another omega who can't." I ended the call, my hand shaking with suppressed rage. Taking several deep breaths, I tried to calm myself, remembering Dr. Kaplan's warnings about stress. Before I could decide my next steps, my phone rang again. "Thaddius. Myra just told me about Lucas showing up at the office," he said without preamble. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," I assured him. "Security handled it. He's gone now." "Why didn't you call me immediately?" I hesitated. I wanted to handle it myself, and I did. I spoke to him directly and made it clear that any further contact would result in legal action. There was a long pause. "I see." His tone was carefully controlled. "And you didn't think this might cause you exactly the kind of stress Dr. Kaplan has warned against." I considered that. I admitted, but I also considered that this is my past. My problem to solve. I needed to face it directly. Another pause. "I understand. I don't agree with your approach, but I understand it." He took an audible breath. What did he want? To threaten me with going to the press with manufactured stories about our past relationship. It's nothing substantial, just attempts to damage my reputation. "I'll have legal prepare cease and assist documentation," Thaddius said, his voice now entirely professional. "And I'll have security increase monitoring of building access." "Thank you," I said, relieved that he wasn't overreacting. "I appreciate you respecting my handling of the situation." "Of course." His tone softened slightly. "I'm leaving the office now. We can discuss this further when I get home if you'd like. After hanging up, I felt a curious mixture of pride and apprehension. I'd managed the situation independently, and Thaddius had respected that, offering support without taking over. It felt like progress in our relationship. That evening, as we discussed the Luca situation more thoroughly, Thaddius remained supportive but concerned. "I worry about the stress this is causing you," he admitted, "especially when we're so close to the baby's arrival." "I know," I acknowledged. But confronting Lucas directly was important to me. It was about proving to myself that he no longer has power over me. Thaddius nodded thoughtfully. "I can understand that need." He hesitated. "Will you allow me to ensure he doesn't approach you again?" "Through legal means only," he added quickly. "No personal interventions or threats." His careful phrasing, his explicit acknowledgement of my boundaries made me smile. Yes, I'd appreciate that. Later that night, as I was preparing for bed, a sharp pain similar to the one I'd experienced months ago tore through my abdomen. This time, I didn't hesitate. I called out for Thaddius immediately. He was beside me in seconds, taking in my pained expression with alarm. "The baby. Something's wrong," I gasped as another contraction hit. "Call Dr. Kaplan." Everything after that happened with terrifying speed. The rush to the hospital, the frantic medical team, the diagnosis. Placental abruption more severe this time. The baby needed to be delivered immediately despite being nearly 6 weeks premature. Thaddius never left my side. His face pale with fear, but his voice steady as he advocated for me when I was too overwhelmed with pain to speak for myself. "The cesarean is the safest option," Dr. Kaplan explained. "For both of you." I nodded through tears of pain and fear, squeezing Thaddius's hand so tightly I must have hurt him. Though he never complained. "I'm scared," I admitted as they prepared me for surgery. "I know," he whispered, pressing his forehead to mine. "But you're the strongest person I know. Zane Cooper. You can do this. We can do this together." The surgery itself was a blur of bright lights and urgent voices. And then suddenly, a cry small but fierce like its Omega father. "It's a boy," Dr. Kaplan announced. Small but with excellent lungs. They brought him to me briefly. This tiny person with a shock of dark hair like Thaddius's and my determined chin. Then he was whisked away to the NICU with Thaddius torn between staying with me and following our son. "Go with him," I urged, fighting to stay conscious against the medications. "Don't let him be alone." The next thing I remember is waking in a recovery room. Thaddius sitting beside me. His expression a complex mix of joy and concern. "How is he?" I asked immediately. "Perfect," Thaddius said, his voice thick with emotion. "Small but fighting hard. The doctors are optimistic." "And how are you?" I reached for his hand, noticing the tears he was trying to hide. "Terrified, grateful, overwhelmed." He kissed my palm. "I almost lost you both. But you didn't," I reminded him. "We're fighters. Your son and I." "Our son," he corrected gently. The recovery was challenging. "Our son, whom we named Ethan, remained in the NICU for 3 weeks, growing stronger each day. I was discharged after 5 days, but spent every possible moment at the hospital, Thaddius arranging for a private room nearby where I could rest between visits. During those long hospital days and nights, something fundamental shifted in our relationship. The artificial boundaries we'd maintained, the careful dance of independence versus togetherness seemed to dissolve in the face of our shared concern for our child. When Ethan was finally cleared to come home, Thaddius had transformed the penthouse, creating a nursery adjacent to both our rooms. The arrangement was practical, but also symbolic. A shared space that connected our separate domains. 6 months after Ethan's birth, I returned to Pinnacle part-time. taking on selected projects while maintaining my flexible schedule. The arrangement worked surprisingly well with Thaddius and I coordinating our calendars to ensure one of us was always available for Ethan. We continued to maintain separate living spaces. I had moved into the apartment next to Thaddius's penthouse with a connecting door that remained mostly open these days. But our lives had become thoroughly intertwined. One evening, as we sat on Thaddius's balcony watching the sunset after putting Ethan to bed, he turned to me with a serious expression. "I've been thinking about something," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "About us and our future." "What about it?" I asked, curious about his suddenly formal tone. These past months have shown me that we work well together as parents, as partners, as colleagues. We found a balance that honors your independence while allowing for genuine connection. I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I don't want to change that balance," he said carefully. "But I do want to formalize it to make a commitment to maintaining it for the long term." "Are you proposing?" I asked, surprised by the direction of the conversation in a manner of speaking. "Yes." He took my hand. Not marriage in the traditional sense with all its patriarchal baggage of alpha authority and omega submission, but a commitment ceremony of our own design reflecting the partnership we've actually built. The suggestion was so perfectly aligned with my values that I found myself speechless. Thaddius Blackwood, Alpha CEO and epitome of traditional power, was proposing a relationship structure that deliberately subverted those very traditions. "I want Ethan to grow up seeing that love doesn't require the sacrifice of identity," he continued when I didn't immediately respond. "That an alpha and an omega can build something equal and strong together." "Yes," I said simply, emotion making my voice rough. "Yes. I want that, too." His smile was radiant as he leaned forward to kiss me, a gesture that had become familiar but never routine. "I love you, Zane Cooper. Exactly as you are. Stubborn independence included. And I love you, Thaddius Blackwood. Even when you're being an overbearing alpha." His laughter joined mine, floating out over the city as the last light faded from the sky, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. One we would write together in our own way, on our own terms.